It started with a sound, a single, deliberate knock in the middle of the night. Then, the second night, 3 knocks. By the third night, I wasn't sleeping. By the fourth, I wasn't alone. Some stories don't need explanations. They don't need proof. Because when you're the one living them, you already know the truth. These are 3 stories that never should have happened, but they did. And once you hear them, you won't forget them either. I was 12 the first time I saw the house, standing alone at the edge of the woods. It was older than the other homes in town, its roof sloping in odd angles, the wooden siding faded and cracked from years of neglect. My parents called it a fresh start. I called it something else. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No distant hum of traffic, no voices from passing neighbors. Just the sound of the wind pushing through the trees and the occasional creak of the house settling under its own weight. The previous owners had left suddenly. Furniture still sat in the living room, an old rocking chair by the window, a child's bicycle rusting in the backyard. It felt frozen in time, like whoever had lived there had walked out one day and never looked back. I should have asked why. The first few nights were quiet. Then the feeling started. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things. A prickle at the back of my neck when I walked past the kitchen window at night. A shadow that seemed longer than it should be in the hallway. But I convinced myself it was nothing. Then came the tapping. The first time. It was so faint I barely noticed it. A soft, rhythmic sound against my window, like the tip of a fingernail gently knocking on the glass. I ignored it. The next night, it came again. 3 taps, then silence. By the third night, I was counting. 1, 2, 3. Always at 3:15 a.m. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body rigid with something I couldn't name. Fear? Dread? I wasn't sure. Then one night, I looked. I didn't want to. I don't know why I did, but something inside me forced my head to turn toward the window. My breath hitched. Outside, barely visible through the darkness, stood a figure. Tall, thin, motionless. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake my parents, but I couldn't move. I just stared, my hands gripping the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. Then, as if it knew I was watching, it slowly lifted one hand, long fingers curling, and tapped against the glass. 3 times. I didn't sleep that night. I told my parents. They dismissed it as a nightmare. New house, new environment. It's just your imagination, my dad had said, but I knew it wasn't. The next night, I locked my window, pulled the blinds shut, and huddled under my blankets. But at exactly 3:15 a.m., the tapping came again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I clenched my eyes shut, willing it to stop. Then I heard the floor creak. Inside the house, something was in my room. My breathing turned shallow, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. I strained to hear, but all that met my ears was silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Then, the closet door opened. I didn't hear it move. I felt it. The air shifted, the room grew colder, and my entire body went numb. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward my bed. I forced myself to move, slipping silently off the mattress and crawling toward the door. My fingers grasped the handle, then a voice, barely above a whisper, drifted through the dark. I see you. I bolted. I don't remember running. I don't remember how I got to my parents' room, only that I was screaming, sobbing, clawing at my dad's arms as he shook me, demanding to know what was wrong. When he finally understood, he grabbed the baseball bat from under his bed and stormed into my room. My mom followed, flipping on every light in the house. Nothing. The closet door stood open, its interior empty. My window was still locked. No footprints on the floor. No signs that anyone had been there. We left the house the next morning. My parents still didn't believe me, not entirely, but my dad saw the look in my eyes, the raw terror I couldn't shake. He made up an excuse about the house being unsafe and booked us into a motel while he figured out the next steps. I didn't sleep that night either. A few weeks later, we moved to another town. The house remained empty. Years passed, but the memories never faded. Sometimes I still feel it. that sensation of being watched, of something unseen lingering just beyond my vision. Then one day, curiosity got the best of me. I searched for the house online. There wasn't much, just a few old photos, a real estate listing, and then an article. A boy, 12 years old, had lived there before us. He had gone missing one night, vanished without a trace. The police searched the house, the woods, but they never found him. The last time his mother saw him, he had told her about a man standing outside his window, tapping 3 times. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my ears. That night, for the first time in years, I woke up at 3:15 a.m. And I swear, I heard it. 3 taps on the glass. I was 23 when I found the house. A Victorian-style rental on the outskirts of town, towering and weathered, with ornate details carved into its wooden frame. The kind of place that had history, that had stood long before anyone I knew was born. The price was ridiculously low. Too low. The kind of deal that makes you hesitate, even if you don't believe in things like bad luck or ghosts. But I was desperate. A new job, a fresh start, a need for solitude. I ignored the voice in the back of my mind telling me to ask why. The landlord was an older man, thin and quiet, his gaze never quite meeting mine as he handed me the keys. His only words of advice were brief, almost dismissive. "Stay out of the basement." I remember laughing, thinking it was some old superstition, or maybe he just stored things down there he didn't want me to touch. It didn't matter. I wasn't planning on exploring. The first night was uneventful. The house smelled of dust and forgotten things, but it was quiet, peaceful. By the second night, the whispering started. At first, I thought it was the wind, a soft, unintelligible murmur, just on the edge of hearing, weaving in and out of the creaks and groans of the house. But then I noticed something. It was coming from inside the walls. Low, rhythmic, almost melodic. A voice, or maybe several, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I lay in bed, straining to hear. The moment I moved, the whispers stopped. Over the next few days, it got worse. The sound followed me, drifting through the house, slipping through the cracks in the floorboards. At night, it settled just outside my bedroom door. One evening, as I was unpacking, I noticed something strange. A door. It wasn't there before. I was sure of it. It stood at the end of the hallway, plain, unremarkable, but something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong. My fingers hesitated on the knob. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around. Then, I heard a whisper from the other side. "Help me." I stumbled back, heart hammering, eyes locked on the door. My breath came in short gasps. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Stress, exhaustion, logical explanations. I avoided the hallway, kept myself busy. But by nightfall, I found myself standing in front of the door again. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and twisted the knob. It turned easily, too easily, as if it had been waiting for me. The door opened onto a narrow staircase, leading down into darkness. A basement. The whispering started again, soft, urgent, beckoning me forward. I took a step, then another. The air was thick, stale, laced with something metallic. A damp, rotting scent clung to the walls. My phone's flashlight cast long, flickering shadows across the stone floor as I moved deeper. Then I saw it. A small, child-sized bed, shackles bolted to the wall, and a diary lying open on a wooden chair. My stomach clenched as I picked it up, the leather cover worn and fragile. I turned to the last entry, the handwriting jagged, desperate. "If you're reading this, it's already too late." A breath, hot, slow, brushed against the back of my neck. I spun around, light darting wildly. The shadows shifted. Something moved in the farthest corner of the room. Not something. Someone. The whispering grew louder. A chorus of voices, overlapping, rushing toward me. Then, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. I ran outside. I don't remember throwing my weight against the door, my fingers clawing at the handle. All I know is that suddenly, I was outside, gasping for air, my chest heaving. I called the police. They searched the basement, found the shackles, the diary, but no one. The landlord refused to talk about it. The house was demolished a month later, but sometimes, late at night, in the silence of my new apartment, I still hear it. A whisper, "Help me." It was past midnight when I left work, exhausted from another long shift. The road ahead stretched empty, winding through miles of dense forest, the occasional streetlight casting long shadows that flickered as I passed. I was halfway home when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the road, just outside the reach of my headlights. A woman in a red dress, barefoot, unmoving, her long dark hair spilling over her shoulders. I eased my foot off the gas. My first instinct was to keep driving. Something about the way she stood, too still, too expectant, set off alarms in my mind. But then I saw her face, pale and streaked with tears, and something inside me hesitated. A woman alone, in the middle of nowhere, this late at night. Against better judgment, I pulled over. I leaned across the passenger seat, rolling down the window just slightly. "Do you need a ride?" She didn't answer. For a moment, she just stared. Her lips parted as if about to speak. Then, slowly, she nodded and stepped toward the car. The second she got in, the air inside turned ice cold. I swallowed hard and forced a smile, trying to ignore the sudden chill pressing against my skin. "Where are you headed?" I asked, shifting the car into drive. She didn't respond. She just sat there, rigid, her hands resting neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed straight ahead. I cleared my throat, keeping one hand tight on the wheel. "You okay?" Still, nothing. The temperature inside the car kept dropping. My breath fogged in front of me, my fingers stiff against the steering wheel. I reached instinctively for the heater, cranking it up, but it didn't help. A strange unease settled over me, growing heavier with each passing mile. Something about her posture was unnatural, too perfect, like she wasn't really sitting, just placed there. I flicked a glance at her through the rearview mirror. She wasn't there. My stomach clenched. I snapped my eyes forward, gripping the wheel tighter. But I could still feel her. The weight of her presence, the cold pressing against my skin. It was as if she was there, but somewhere I couldn't see. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was just exhaustion, I told myself. Just my mind playing tricks. Then I heard it. A breath. Soft. Just behind my ear. I slammed my foot on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt, tires skidding against the pavement. For a moment, there was only silence. My pulse thundered in my ears, my chest heaving with each sharp breath. Then, slowly, I turned my head. She was sitting in the back seat. Her face was inches from mine. Her lips cracked and colorless, her eyes dark and hollow. A smile curled at the edges of her mouth, but it wasn't right. It stretched too wide, the corners pulling unnaturally toward her ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Then she whispered, a sound that wasn't words, just a rasping, gurgling murmur, like something trying to speak through waterlogged lungs. The car lights flickered. The radio crackled with static. And then, she vanished. Just like that. One moment she was there, staring into me, and the next, the seat was empty. But in the rearview mirror, her reflection remained. My body jolted into action. I threw the car into drive and floored it, my heart hammering, my breath ragged. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I made it home just before dawn. I barely remember pulling into my driveway, barely remember fumbling with my keys as I rushed inside. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told myself it was just exhaustion, a hallucination, stress from working too many late shifts. But something inside me knew better. Later that week, I heard the story. A woman in a red dress. A woman who had died 20 years ago on that very stretch of road. The reports said she had been walking home late one night when a driver hit her and left her for dead. No one stopped. No one helped. She was found the next morning, her body broken, her face twisted in silent agony. People say she still waits there. That sometimes, late at night, she appears on the roadside. And if you stop, if you let her in, you never drive alone again. I never picked up another hitchhiker. But But sometimes, when I'm on that road, driving through the empty darkness, I still see her, standing there, waiting. There are things in this world we are not meant to understand. Some stories stay with us, etching themselves into the corners of our minds, waiting for the right moment to resurface. No matter how much time passes, no matter how far we try to run from them, they linger. I told myself I could forget, that the past was just the past. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is still, I remember. The tapping at the window, the whispers in the dark, the reflection in the mirror that shouldn't have been there. These are the stories that have haunted me, and now they'll haunt you too. But what if I told you? There's one more. A story I've never spoken aloud. A story I wish I could forget. Should I tell it? Let me know. Which story disturbed you the most? Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know in the comments, if you dare. And if you love real horror stories, don't forget to subscribe, because you never know what's lurking in the dark.